work with the United States in peace and security within the region, because we are committed to that. And we just want to thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, thank you. And such good English, such beautiful. Where did you learn to speak so beautifully? Where were you educated? Where?
Yes, sir.
In Liberia.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's very interesting. That's beautiful English.
Sure.
Trump's Africa Summit, disrespecting African leaders, BRICS snubs, and of course, the trade threats for BRICS nations and those who support tricks. Those who support BRICS. Welcome to This Week in Africa, where we talk about all things related to news on the continent of Africa, in a collaborative effort between Authentic African and the Gloria AO. We'll break down this week's breaking news and its impact on Pan-Africanism and Africa's independence. Today, we dive into the Trump-hosted African Summit at the White House, obviously overshadowed by disrespect toward African leaders, and obviously there were some notable BRICS no-shows. But before we get into that story and many more, we'll do some intros. I'll turn it over to my co-host to intro herself before I do an intro myself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gloria Ao, creator and host of The African Story. You can catch me on social media for more details on those, on the stories that I tell. I'm definitely very happy to be here, and it's going to be a very interesting show. I can't wait to dive in.
Absolutely. It's going to be an interesting one. And I'm Joe Hatagwa, founder of Authentic African, a website that ethically sources products from African artisans all around the continent of Africa, hand-sourced. So that's the website. And then the platform is meant to bridge the gap between Africans living on the continent and Africans in the diaspora, all with three main goals: to get people to visit, move, and or invest in the continent of Africa. So now we got that out the way. Let's talk about the stories today. So quick rundown. We're talking about the African Summit that happened at the White House. Then we'll get into the tariffs for BRICS countries and countries that support BRICS. And then we'll talk about the tragedy that's happening in Kenya with the police unaliving protesters. We'll then talk about AKON and the AKON city, and we'll juxtapose that with Idris Elba's new SHERBRO alliance in my home country of Sierra Leone. And then lastly, the last major story we're going to cover is Grammy winner Angelique Kidjo making history. So let's get right into the first story. So as you saw from that clip, there was a summit at the White House. Notable African powerhouses were missing because there is an ongoing BRICS summit. We'll talk about that in a moment, but let's just get into the summit itself, right? What was the purpose of the summit, right? Because a lot of people were wondering, these videos went viral. What was the purpose of the summit? And so on the 9th of July, the United States President Donald Trump hosted leaders from 5 African countries at the White House. The goal of that meeting was to discuss trade and development. And so, as you guys know, during those talks, he was stunned by an African leader speaking English. So we're going to get into the reason for the summit and a little bit more background on it, and then we will give some more commentary on the other side.
Donald Trump. This was 5 African leaders at lunch with Donald Trump. This was the scene on Wednesday in the White House in Washington, where the US president had invited the presidents of Senegal, Gabon, Liberia, Mauritania and Guinea-Bissau for a summit that came as a surprise to many. The Trump administration branded the event as one of the steps it is taking to reshape its relationship with the African continent.
There's a lot of anger on your continent, and we've been able to solve a lot of it. My administration is committed to strengthening our friendships in Africa through economic development efforts that benefit both the United States and our partners. And we're working tirelessly to forge new economic opportunities involving both the United States and many African nations. There's great economic potential in Africa, like few other places in many ways, and the long run, this will be far more effective and sustainable and beneficial than anything else that we can be doing together. I'm eager to work with each of you on your vital issues and also to discuss security.
We have minerals. Speeches from the 5 West African leaders included much praise for the US president.
Just want to thank you so much for this.
Mauritanian President Mohamed Ould Ghazouani welcomed Trump's commitment to the
Where
continent.
did you learn to speak so beautifully?
The US president has repeatedly expressed his interest in increasing commercial ties with Africa.
Well, that's very interesting. It's beautiful English.
Sure.
I have people at this table can't speak nearly as well. At some point, I would like to go to Africa, absolutely. We're going to see what the schedule is, but at some point, I would like to do that very much.
Some experts, however, pointed out the absence of Africa's major economic players, such as Nigeria, Egypt and South Africa, at the high-level lunch.
So, as you can see, a number of different things happen, and we'll go over some of the gaffes, you know, the viral moments. But that right there was, I guess, the purpose of it, right? To discuss trade. And as the host mentioned, there were some notable missing folks. Gloria, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. You know, obviously this came across our desks yesterday, and it was kind of breaking news, so we decided we were going to lead with it today. But what were your thoughts when you saw, first of all, the summit, and then also the surprise that a Liberian president spoke English well?
First time I heard Joe speak, I was like, wow, he speaks so well, you know, Sierra Leonean. Nah. But anyway, first of all, we lost a lot of sleep over this summit.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, this is what we do. These are the things we do, you know, to ensure that we're bringing you the news fresh and hot of the oven. But anyway, so yeah, U.S. aid was recently shut down because the U.S. now prefers to focus on partnerships than on giving aid. That was the way they sort of phrased it. Of course, the removal of aid was extremely abrupt months ago, but now they're trying to soften it. Like now we're focusing on partnerships. Right. Perhaps some would argue that what Trump is doing with these partnerships is far better than having us rely on America for aid. And now he has called for a mini summit, and our dear leaders have gone to the White House. Why do African leaders keep doing this? Why can't these people who need you way more than you need them, but obviously you can't see that, why can't they come to you? Clearly, Trump doesn't know much about Africa, and this would have been a great opportunity for him to take a tour and see that we actually have people who, some people speak English, a lot of people speak English on the continent. But our leaders chose to be there, and they were all like, oh, look at me, Trump. My minerals are so shiny. Oh, please pick me. And yes, I get it. I get it. These presidents are dealing with tight economies. Debt is rising. The youth are restless. But we cannot keep meeting foreign leaders from a position of desperation instead of leverage. This is exactly why Africa is where it is, and why some people outside the continent, such as Trump, see us the way they do. But anyway, regarding what Trump is doing, and Joe, we've talked about this, how partnerships are more important, or at least they're better optics than moves that were made previously when it comes to Africa. We've given him this advice time and time again. So clearly, Trump has been listening to This Week in Africa. But anyway, Trump, you do need Africa, as we've said repeatedly. Because otherwise you're opening the doors for other countries, and you've recognized this. Obama started this summit in 2014. Biden continued it. Do you know this is the first time Trump is actually doing it? Because he didn't do it in his first term. But he's doing it now, even though it's narrower, it's more transactional. He's well aware of what time it is. And there was a part where he said there's a lot of anger on your continent. Maybe what he meant was there's a lot of tension in Africa, and maybe this trade or these partnerships can help to ease it. But trade without justice will only keep escalating tension. And maybe America should be more concerned with the role that it has played with this anger. what does America need to change in its foreign policy? Is America's military presence in Africa fueling this so-called anger? What exactly is making people fight? Because people don't get angry for fun, and any leader, be it African or American, who fails to understand that will always misread it. But before I know I've said a lot, but regarding, because I don't want to miss this part, regarding the economies, the major economies that were not at that table, such as Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia, that is questionable. But I think BRICS clearly has something to do with this, because South Africa, Egypt, and Ethiopia have all aligned in varying degrees with the BRICS bloc. Nigeria attended the last summit, so no surprise that Trump didn't invite any of these countries, which are some of Africa's biggest players. So what Trump is doing now is focusing on the countries with smaller economies. They may be smaller economically, but they matter to Washington now because of the untapped mineral resources beneath their soil. And they're well aware of who else might want it, namely China, Russia, and really, they're well aware of the rising influence of BRICS in Africa. But at the end of the day, I will always stand on the heel of Africa sustaining itself because we have everything it takes. These people know that. And in the meantime, however, I do hope that these leaders are able to hold America to real terms, focus on fair trade deals, focus on transparency, focus on guaranteed investment, and not just lip service at a lunch with Trump.
Well put. I think you covered it all. Yeah, I mean, look, so I'll take you guys back to when I saw this. So I saw the headline first, right? And I thought to myself, okay, just another moment for an embarrassment of African leaders. And then I, watched more of the overall summit and the discussion. And, as you said, there are a lot of arguments to be made that trade over aid is the way that we as folks who are looking at Africa to be more independent, that's what we'd like to see, right? The question is whether or not the trade will have any actual benefits. As you mentioned, stepping back to the USAID or US aid being cut, the number of monkeypox outbreak is something that is directly contributed to that aid cut, right? There are other, infectious diseases that are spreading at a higher rate now because a lot of that aid was useful. We'd like to see African countries take back that control and do that themselves. But that's something that you kind of have to work to do over time, and it kind of just ripped off the Band-Aid. So we'll see if we change that. Fingers crossed that does happen. On the trade versus aid side, right? So if we're moving towards trade, again, of course, every country is going to operate in their own best interest. And as one of the commenters said, Africa operates as 54, or I guess maybe 51 independent entities. And I go between 54 and 51 because AES is now one federation, right? So Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali are now considered like one federation, which is like one country. So technically it's like 51 different entities. They realize collective bargaining allows them to be able to take a seat at the table and actually operate with deals that have the interest of their country first, and ensures that they're actually benefiting from the deal, whereas all the other countries are operating independently and they're all being taken advantage of because you have countries that are much larger dealing with much smaller countries on the continent of Africa. And since they're operating independently in silos, they're not able to get the kind of deals that would be best for their country. And a lot of the leaders, unfortunately, on the continent are keeping much of that money for themselves. So although this is kind of the direction that I think many of us say that we want the continent to go in, I think what's more likely to happen is a new form of neocolonialism where the resources of Africa are continued to be, taken and not benefiting those who live on the soil itself. Comments about questions and doctors on the continent. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. And I think the challenge is, when you hear this, there's this joke that I heard someone say is, where are Nigeria's best doctors? They're in London and in the US, right? Where are you know, Kenya's best doctors. They're outside of the country of Kenya, outside of the continent. And so that is one of the challenges we have is brain drain, where many folks from the continent leave and go to the West, right? And so we'd like to see that change, but that's part of the reason why you see, you know, some of the challenges we see where aid is sought after outside of the continent. All right. I do want to get to this next piece because, you know, obviously those were talks. There weren't any deals technically made that day. And what you find a lot of times with the current administration is there are a lot of discussions of deals. There are MOUs signed, but we don't see any of those things coming to fruition. So we'll have to pay attention and see what ends up happening. But as of right now, there were a lot of talks. There was a lot of congratulatories and thank yous, but there really wasn't much substance in terms of things that were inked to see if there are any actual deals happening. So once we hear more about that, we'll be bringing that to you. But it just ended up being more of an S show. You guys can understand what I'm saying, than actually a productive summit. With that, I do want to get to some of the viral moments that happened where I see as just straight disrespect. So as you saw in that first clip, and those of you who joined later, you'll get a chance to see more of that. President Trump complimented Liberia's president, saying, "Thank you, such good English, such beautiful. Where did you learn to speak so beautifully?" And obviously, President Joseph, is it Boakai? Yeah, Joseph Boakai responded by saying, you know, he learned to speak English in Liberia. I don't know if you guys know this, but, you know, Liberia was actually, in terms of its establishment, was with the United States, right? The flag looks like the U.S. flag with one star, right? It's the official language of Liberia is English. Anyway, we'll get more into that afterwards. But and then there was also Mauritania's president, where he opened the African leader's remarks with a warm thank you for Trump. He spoke of the country's many resources, including iron ore and fishing. And then Trump, you'll notice, started to urge him to move along, like he was bored and he was ready to move on. And he said, "But I appreciate it very much. I appreciate it." He said, "Maybe we're going to have to go a little quicker than this." So let's watch the gaffes and disrespect, and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
We want to work with the United States in peace and security within the region.
Well, thank you. It's such good English, such beautiful. Where did you learn to speak so beautifully? Where were you educated? Where?
Yes, sir.
In Liberia.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's very interesting. It's beautiful English.
Sure.
And we have a lot of resources in our sea waters, so lots of fishing and whatnot. I don't want to spend too much time on this.
But I appreciate it very much. I appreciate it. Maybe we're going to have to go a little bit quicker than this.
So, to the point of, and you know, Tim Black mentioned Liberia was an American colony. The current iteration of Liberia with its country borders was the United States basically established it. Love to get your thoughts on this in particular, both how he was, you know, basically rushing the Mauritania's president, and also, you know, this whole idea of not his lack of knowledge of Liberia's origins and the official language of Liberia. A person he's sitting across from is not aware that their national language is English.
So I'm going to come from a surprising angle, Joe. I think that Trump's personal feud with Elon Musk is giving us some sort of recalibration. I also believe that the protest in favor of Traore sent a message to America. So Trump is aware that Africans, and I'm not even talking about our leaders because we haven't seen them stand up for the continent enough, but Trump is aware that Africans will not tolerate threats or disrespect. So what I'm sensing, or what I'm seeing actually, is Trump trying to be more respectful of Africans, but it just isn't landing. From, as we discussed this last week, him talking about the female reporter's beauty, to him now praising the Liberian president's English. It is as though he is shocked that Africans can be that beautiful, or that Africans can speak English so well. I mean, the man has let us know that he needs to go to Africa. But really, you don't even have to go to Africa to be enlightened and to be open-minded and to not look at people through your bias. Putin does not speak English when he's having, at least not when he's having official communication. He's had meetings with you, Trump. Will you say Putin is not educated because he's not speaking English? Will you say the president of China is not educated because he's not communicating with you in English? But anyway, Trump seems, and I said this last week, he seems to be trying to soften toward Africa, but it's still very awkward. I guess compared to past dismissals, like when he called some African nations asshole countries, or him saying he didn't know where Congo was, or him, dismissing Lesotho, at least we're seeing a shift. Again, his tone is still awkward, but he's arguably less dismissive, and at least there's some sort of pivot towards engagement. And am I wowed by the softer approach towards Africa? It's transactional. It's business for this man at the end of the day. We all saw him, as far as the Mauritanian leader, you can see that he was trying so hard to be patient, but he couldn't help it because the body language let us know he wasn't feeling the long narration that he was being presented. So he's definitely conscious of being at his best behavior. But again, at the end of the day, it's all transactional. As far as the West is concerned, Africa is a marketplace. So we need to keep this in mind and stop going to Trump, thanking him for bringing us to the White House and thanking him for all the peace he's bringing to Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. Point that you made there quickly in passing was, if Putin was speaking Russian and not English, would you ask if Putin was educated? Because the question was a two-part question. When he asked the Liberian president, were you educated? And then where were you educated? Now, maybe he just missed the word where first, right? Maybe he meant to say, where were you educated? But he did say, were you educated? And so that's why when Liberian president said yes, he was answering that question. Then he said, in Liberia. Then he said, yes, sir. So the question of were you educated, I'm not sure it was intentional, maybe it was unintentional. But to your point, it was awkward because it shows you his stance already, like where he's coming from. He obviously sees Africans as inferior in many ways, but he also realizes that something's going on, right? If China's there, Russia's there, then we might need to be there somehow, some way. And even saying that I need to visit, which is something he hasn't done yet as a president, but previous administrations, presidents have, and the Secretary of States have often, and vice presidents have. So it'll be interesting to see if he goes, where he goes. But I see it as maybe unlikely, but we'll see. With that, as we mentioned earlier, there were some notable folks missing, right? Some of the biggest economies on the continent of Africa, South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria. When you look at foreign direct investment, when you look at startup investment, when you look at healthcare, specifically in Egypt's up there, depending on who you talk to. South Africa, for sure, is considered number one on the continent in terms of healthcare, and there are a lot of people who dispute that, but just that's what the general consensus is. But when you look at the GDP, foreign direct investment, remittance, all of that kind of stuff, those countries are named, and those countries are either interested, aligned with BRICS and BRICS +6, right? Because there's like new countries that joined BRICS last year. They were notably missing from this meeting, and we want to get into why. So quickly, I'll just give a little bit of a preamble on what's been happening with the BRICS summit. So at the same time, there was a BRICS summit happening, and Indian Prime Minister Modi and South African President Ramaphosa met on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, which was in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Marking their second meeting in less than 3 weeks. The two leaders reaffirmed their shared commitment to strengthening the voice of the global South and jointly called for urgent reforms to the United Nations, particularly the Security Council. Modi emphasized the need for more inclusive, multipolar world order, while Ramaphosa echoed concerns that the UN is outdated and unable to address modern global challenges. So their meeting highlighted the growing alignment between India and South Africa on global governance. And of course, obviously other meetings were happening while at the BRICS summit, as they always do. And just as a reminder, right, the BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, right? That's the original BRICS. And then BRICS plus 6 includes, I want to make sure I have all the right countries now. UAE is included now. Egypt is included, Ethiopia. So 2 new African countries were added. Egypt and Ethiopia were added in that BRICS plus 6. Coincidentally, Iran was added to the BRICS plus 6. And so that's why you see this conversation about the UN Security Council, because obviously Iran has been bombed not only by Israel recently, but by the United States. So let's get into this video and we'll have some more commentary on the other side. And the audio from this video.
Ramaphosa is
let's
attending the summit. Right. We start with updates from the ongoing BRICS summit in Brazil's Rio de Janeiro. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is attending the summit. He met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the sidelines and endorsed his call for reforming the United Nations Security Council. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi posted on X about his meeting with President Ramaphosa. The post was captioned, "Good catching up with my friend." During his address, Prime Minister Modi made a clarion call for a multipolar, inclusive world order through meaningful institutional reforms. He reiterated that global organizations formed in the 20th century lack the capacity to tackle 21st century challenges. And South African President Cyril Ramaphosa backed this call. In his address, he urged for a reformed United Nations Security Council, saying the body has become too rigid, too narrow, and too disconnected from today's multipolar realities. In the joint declaration, BRICS members reiterated their support for India and Brazil's aspirations for a greater role at the United Nations, including the Security Council.
And Brazil and India obviously are very densely populated countries, and so it would probably make sense for them to be to have greater roles because they also have large populations and growing GDP. So with that, I'd love to get your thoughts on the BRICS summit and in conjunction and happening at the same time as the Africa summit at the White House.
Yeah. So as you've mentioned, several African countries, or some African countries, particularly South Africa, which is the only original African member, are either BRICS members or formal invitees. Nigeria has been courted, but it remains non-aligned. So BRICS essentially offers an alternative to Western systems such as the IMF, World Bank, SWIFT, and it now presents itself as a multipolar alternative and is really trying to get sovereignty for the global South. Now, being part of BRICS does come with benefits, especially as de-dollarization has become a talking point. So African countries being part of this movement is a good look. It's much better than for Africans to go around begging for aid and thanking people for inviting them to the White House. Somebody said it's not fun, it's disrespectful and condescending to Africa. You're absolutely right. But when they say you have to laugh to keep from crying. And honestly, at this point, Trump is honestly just, we've said things about Trump, and even now, even in him trying to switch gears, it's still so awkward. So there's so much for Trump to learn as far as biases are concerned. And clearly, he's acted out towards the African countries that are part of BRICS or in support of BRICS. And at the end of the day, you can't force people. And that's why someone like Ramaphosa chooses to be multipolar. You can't force people to align. I mean, this has been the pattern for Africa. You're either with the Soviet region, or you're with America, or you're with the UK. Why do you have to box us in? And right now, because of anti-Western sentiments, Africans support BRICS because a lot of them are angry at the West. So Africa's most powerful negotiating tool at the end of the day is its unity. If BRICS becomes a platform where Africa speaks with one voice, where Africa is able to demand respect, where Africa is able to get fair trade, I believe this can work.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think what we're finding with this BRICS is it's not only an alternative to the IMF and the World Bank and some of those like financial institutions, it's also an alternative to the trade institutions. So we're talking about the NATO and, you know, North Atlantic Trade Organization and G7 and all these other groups that basically are working on trade, inter-country and intracontinental trade. And this is basically, you know, these bilateral negotiations and discussions and trade alliances are, you know, as they come together, are absolutely competing with many of the others that we are seeing. And so, you know, when you have that level of trade, you have that level of alliance and constant communication and discussion, you now have a lot more power because it's collective bargaining. As we say, we want to see the continent of Africa do that. Right now with BRICS, you see folks from all over the world who maybe have differences with some folks in the West, and as we mentioned, the global South, or the global North. They have differences with the global North. They happen to be the global South. This now becomes an alternative. They're, you know, removing debt, changing their debt to different currencies, right? At the beginning of BRICS, there was some conversations about the countries that were in BRICS changing their debt out of the US dollar and moving to the, you know, the Chinese yuan. Or in India, I think India moved the debt that they had with other countries to the rupee and other currencies. And so I think that that's something that we're going to continue to watch and see, you know, how this comes to fruition. Right now, it seems like there are a lot of trade talks and conversations that are happening. We'll see how this develops over time. But it does seem that there is going to be a little bit more autonomy as you see these groups kind of continuing to develop and adding more countries. As you said, you know, it's the BRICS plus 6 plus official invitees. And, you know, because of that, there looks to be potential additional tariffs. So there's already tariff discussions, and then there's an additional pendency looking like it's coming to those folks who are supportive of BRICS. There was a question asked to Trump recently about potential additional tariffs, a 10% charge to those who align with what he calls anti-American policies, and it's and what it could mean to the potential impact of the U.S. dollar. And so we will get to that question and his response, and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
On the tariff issue, so you talked about India coming. But then a couple days ago, you issued a new tariff threat to members of the BRICS countries for if they aligned with anti-American policies. 10% charge. That would be India, Brazil,
That's
Russia,
right. They have to pay 10% if they're in BRICS, because BRICS was set up to hurt us. BRICS was set up to degenerate our dollar and take our dollar as the standard, take it off as the standard. And that's okay if they want to play that game, but I can play that game too. So anybody that's in BRICS is getting a 10% charge.
Is that immediate, sir? Or is
Yeah,
that
pretty soon.
If they engage in some behavior?
Well, if they're a member of BRICS, they're going to have to pay 10% tariff just for that one thing. And they won't be a member long. I thought BRICS was, you know, I said this about a year ago, and it largely broke up. But, you know, there are a couple that hang around, but I thought it largely broke up. BRICS is not, in my opinion, not a serious threat. But what they're trying to do is destroy the dollar so that another country can take over and be the standard. And we're not going to lose the standard at any time. If you have a smart president, you will never lose the standard. If you have a stupid president, like the last one, you would lose the standard. You wouldn't have the dollar as you. And if we lost the world standard dollar, that would be like losing a war, a major world war. We would not be the same country any longer. We're not going to let that happen. The dollar, you ever hear the expression, dollar is king? The dollar is king. We're going to keep it that way, okay? And I'm just saying, if people want to challenge it, They can, but they're going to have to pay a big price. And I don't think any of them are willing to pay that price.
I think the expression is cash is king, by the way. Some of them are still hanging around. Not a okay. Well, anyway, your thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that response. The BRICS, some of them are still hanging around, largely disbanded. You know, it's not as effective as he thought it was going to be, but there is this tariff just for being in BRICS. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of that. That's just what he said there.
Yeah, whoever came up with the idea of tariffs way back in the day must really be rolling in their grave at what tariffs have become in the hands of Trump. I mean, now you're at war with Brazil, with the whole threat of 50%, and Brazil has vowed to return the favor. So it's just such a crazy time in history, to be honest. It's not funny, but it definitely is crazy. And again, this takes us back to the Cold War. You know, with African nations being punished, either they're being punished or they're being rewarded, depending on who they align with. Do you align with the US? Do you align with the USSR? To Trump and many in Washington, BRICS is a challenge to the West. So by threatening tariffs, he's trying to maintain US supremacy. Even the talk about the dollar being king and dollar has to be the standard, that's just all about US supremacy. China and Russia are actually used to being punished, but their economies will survive. But as for these African countries, the reason they're aligning with BRICS in the first place is because they need to diversify their economies. But Trump does not care about all of that. So Africa may end up being a casualty of someone else's power struggle yet again. That I think for me is the big irony in all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if they're not a threat, you wouldn't use tariffs to try to quell, stop, slow down what is happening, right? Obviously, there are some concerns where, countries with large GDP, large, economies and large trading blocks with other parts of the world are concerned. Cash is king is the actual statement. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's cash is king, not dollar is king. I think some people in America might say dollar is king, and it has been, right? Don't get me wrong. I think that it was a misquote. But, yes, the dollar standard has been the standard. As someone who spends a lot of time on the continent, you'll notice that when people talk about how well the currency is doing, they always compare it to the dollar, right? So when you're talking to someone, they'll ask you, like, what's the dollar rate? Right? Everybody always asks, what's the dollar rate? In fact, if you're doing real estate in Ghana, they'll ask you to pay in dollars, because it tends to be a more stable currency. Most countries' debt is in the US dollar. It is the money that most people change their money to when they're traveling to other countries to make sure that, they can, it's a better ratio and conversion rate from money to the other currency. All of those things are true, and this is a potential threat to that. And I think that that's what basically is what you're seeing a response to, right? There's a fear that that would no longer be the case. And so, as much as he has a poker face on there, I think he's concerned. And I think many people in the U.S. government and in the West and the global North are concerned about what's happening with BRICS, and they're hoping to figure out ways to combat it and don't allow it to get bigger, right? Because as I said, it was BRICS. It was an original, there was only one country that was originally a part of it. Then one African country, sorry, that was originally a part of it, and that's South Africa. Now Ethiopia and Egypt are a part of BRICS. And, obviously, as we mentioned, there are other invited members, and there's other people who are interested, and there's all kinds of talks about many more countries joining. So there are some real concerns. I think that there was this, I think, was a little bit of using a poker face to show that there wasn't so much of a concern. I know that we spent a significant amount of time on some of these stories. These are some really important ones. But there is another really important story happening on the continent that is a really serious and tragic one. And we want to just shift gears a bit to what we're seeing in the country of Kenya. As you guys have seen, we've reported on this, or we've talked about this on the last couple of live streams. There have been protests and violent clashes between those in the police force with unarmed civilians that are just doing what they think is right and protesting. And then in some cases, there are bad actors. So at least 11 folks have experienced loss of life. Over 60 people have been injured in clashes, that violent clashes between Kenyan police and protesters demanding the removal of their president, William Ruto. Police used tear gas and water cannons to disperse crowds that had lit bonfires and several flashpoints on the outskirts of the capital, Nairobi. And we will play a video and give you some commentary on the other side.
Tension gripped Kenya's capital, Nairobi, on Monday as police fired tear gas and water cannon to disperse hundreds of protesters. A Reuters reporter witnessed police open fire on a crowd of advancing protesters. One man was subsequently seen lying motionless on the road with a bloody wound. A police spokesperson did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The clashes marked the 35th anniversary of pro-democracy rallies known as Saba Saba, Swahili for 7-7, commemorating July 7, 1990, that called for a shift to multi-party democracy. Authorities locked down major roads and restricted vehicle traffic, leaving normally bustling streets deserted except for determined demonstrators on foot. Most schools and at least one shopping mall remained closed in anticipation of unrest. This year's rally follows a wave of youth-led protests in June, which began over tax hikes, but quickly widened to include anger over corruption, police violence, and the mysterious disappearances of government critics. Fatma Luyundi, one of the demonstrators, says many families are still searching for loved ones.
Going back home is not going to help us. Our children are being abducted and killed. Parents are looking for their children, but they cannot locate them.
Our party.
Kenya's interior minister said the government was committed to protecting life and property.
It was riots, chaos, and anarchy.
Last month, Kipchumba Murkomen described the protests as, quote, terrorism disguised as dissent.
We are peaceful! We are peaceful!
The recent death of teacher and blogger Albert Ojwang in police custody has fueled public anger. Prosecutors approved murder charges against 6 people, including 3 police officers, over Ojwang's death. All 6 suspects pleaded not guilty. The government-funded Kenya National Commission on Human Rights reported 19 deaths nationwide during demonstrations on June 25th.
You're on mute.
Really sad. More to come. Sorry about that. It's getting calls, so I had to put myself on mute. So your thoughts on what's been happening in Kenya with the protests and how the police have been handling it?
Yeah, I had good goosebumps. I had chills just watching the part where, the protesters were on their knees, saying we are peaceful, we're peaceful. Like they actually have to remind you that they're peaceful. This is not the first time Kenya has reached a boiling point over governance. The Saba Saba protest, which was referenced, were named after the protests that began on July 7, 1990, when there were calls for multi-party democracy during the authoritarian regime of Daniel Arap Moi. Now, that protest was also brutal. There was detention, there was torture, there was political exile, but at least it sparked something. Kenya's one-party system eventually came to an end. So it's no coincidence that the protesters chose this date again. Kenya has always struggled to hold security forces accountable for violence. At this point, Ruto has lost the public's trust because he has refused to listen to the youth. And what makes this protest different from other protests, President Ruto, and I hope that other Africans can learn from this, is the nature of the protest itself. The protesters they're not party loyalists. They're not funded by opposition. They are digitally literate and decentralized. So that makes them even harder to bribe or divide. Shout out to Kenya. We stand with you. We support you 1,000%.
Absolutely. And I think the what you're seeing here is obviously a complete opposite. What you're hearing from the government of Kenya versus what you're seeing with your own eyes it's the complete opposite, right? They're trying to tell you to not believe, what did it say? Don't believe what your lying eyes are seeing, or whatever the phrase is. Obviously, you know, you see people on their knees saying we're peaceful protesters, right? But then you see them hosing people, shooting tear gas, live rounds being shot at people, right? 11 people lost their lives. And people have lost lives in other protests prior to this one. You know, this one there was kind of protests all month long, right? Last month. And, you know, some of them began because of the treatment of, you know, civilians. And then it kind of led into the anniversary of last year's protests. And again, the Saba protest from, you know, some time ago with, basically under a dictatorship. And so, you know, it's unfortunate to see that as much protesting as that's been happening, and it's inspiring to see people willing to risk their lives to try to make a change. It doesn't seem like there is any change coming, right? You know, last year, Ruto fired his entire cabinet while people were asking him to step down. He basically fired his entire cabinet, put new people in those positions, but continued in his place. And so, you know, you find that, you know, it doesn't seem as if these protests are moving the country in the direction that the people want. And I think that's the most unfortunate piece, is that as much as they are protesting, it just seems that more of the same is happening. You know, a couple more things that I want to share with you guys. We'll play two videos that I think are coinciding with each other, because we talked previously about the rhetoric of different politicians in Kenya. So let's watch these two videos back to back, and then we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Shoot in the leg. Kenya's President William Ruto ordered police forces on Wednesday to curb vandalism from protesters by incapacitating anyone trying to damage businesses.
Like this, a Kenyan leader has offered paid goons an extra 100,000 shillings if they attack me while covering the protests, beat me up, smash our equipment. And they confessed to that on camera, because they were not fully paid for the last protests. Some pro-government accounts on social media are calling for me to be arrested for inciting people to violence, even though all we have done is report what's going on, call out police brutality, and show the people the truth. In fact, one lawmaker has also called for me to be arrested. We will not be intimidated. Journalism is not a crime. That's not the reason why I'm not there today. I am in Nigeria because we had planned this weeks ago. I could not cancel it. And the job is international correspondent, not just Kenya correspondent.
So for context there, you know, we saw the first video. It's pretty clear what Ruto has told people. But this is Larry Madowo, who is a CNN international correspondent, as he mentioned. He mentions in his Instagram post that the people were offered 100,000 shillings, as he mentioned, which is about $775, to attack him while covering protests, right? So just want to give that context before we give our commentary. So, you know, Gloria, what are your thoughts on this particular video and the one we watched prior to that one?
Yes, even though the statement shoot them in the leg, some have argued that that quote was taken out of context. What is not up for debate is that there has been live ammunition and we have seen blood. Okay. We also talked about the minister last week, who we talked about Ruto's minister last week, who actually we saw him instructing the police to shoot protesters I think if they headed to the police station or something. This is all very reminiscent of the British labeling Mau Mau resistance fighters as terrorists. Now, someone who is supposed to be our own, Ruto, is calling Gen Z protesters coup plotters and economic saboteurs. And asking that they get shot, allegedly, is just concerning. This stuff just keeps escalating. So now journalists are being targeted too. You know, local media houses were banned from broadcasting the protest, but Larry Madowo is international. And what Larry is revealing is very disturbing. 100,000 shillings is about $775. Even he wrote in the comment that he was low-key mad that this was all they offered the goons. But we have seen the pattern. Well, I have seen it in Nigeria at least. People coming out to confess what they were hired to do after they don't get paid fully. But as Larry said, journalism is not a crime. We will not be intimidated.
Yeah, well put. I mean, you said it all. And I think that it's, again, you know, look, the government's become more emboldened, it seems, right? You would think that, as I mentioned, it doesn't feel like any changes are coming. In fact, I should rephrase that. Changes are coming, but it just seems more emboldened as opposed to, you know, the will of the people. And so, you know, we'll continue to follow this, and we'll continue to give you guys updates on this story. It's an important one, and we want to make sure that you guys are aware that the fight has not stopped. Just because, you know, mainstream media outlets are not reporting on it as much as they might have been in the beginning. The protests continue, and the escalations continue as well. Now we are going to move on to West Africa. Unfortunately, this is an unfortunate story. And you know, we got two versions of the same story. You know, I think those of us who are interested in the continent, and some of our, you know, first generation or those born on the continent that live in the diaspora who have, you know, established some level of wealth and notoriety, have ideas for what they want to do on the continent. And AKON is one of them, right? So many people call him the son of Africa. You know, over the last few years, you might have seen the business AKON Lighting Africa, where he was bringing solar power to many countries. And that was inspired by a trip to Sierra Leone, I think back in 2009. And he realized how dark the country was, not having much light. And so he had this idea of this solar company that he was planning to do. And then his country of Senegal is where he was deciding he wanted to do this futuristic city, right? AKON City. People were calling it the Wakanda, modern day Wakanda, real life Wakanda. And unfortunately, Senegal ditched what some people are calling an unrealistic city project. It was designed with curvy landscapes, sleek infrastructure. Early renderings of AKON City drew comparisons to what people, you know, said. Like I said, you know, the African metropolis, Wakanda, that's a Marvel fictional city. But unfortunately, the plug has been pulled. So we'll play a video here and give some more commentary on the other side.
Touted as a high-tech utopia powered by renewable energy and bankrolled by its own cryptocurrency, AKON City was ambitious as it was daring. Designed with curvy skyscrapers and sleek modern infrastructure, early renderings of AKON City drew comparisons to Marvel's fictional African metropolis, Wakanda. It was supposed to come at a cost of $6 billion. So I wanted to build. Nearly 7 years on, much of the 800-acre piece of land allocated for the project remains an empty grassland, save for a single unfinished reception building. Now Senegal is repossessing the land to build something realistic, the BBC reported, citing the country's tourism authorities. Senegal's leaders had hoped that the project would help transform the country where AKON, born Alioune Badara Thiam, spent a part of his childhood. The singer has struggled to get funding for the project, while legal challenges have also taken their toll.
So, unfortunately, he had the right idea. Didn't seem like the execution worked out. Gloria, what are your thoughts here? You're on mute, by the way.
Hi. Yeah. First thing I thought was, oh man, there goes our Wakanda. But I do have to commend AKON's ambition. Some may say, you know, he was over ambitious. He meant well. Is that ding coming from me? I apologize.
It is. No, it's on my side. Sorry.
Okay. He meant well. You know, the government gave public verbal support, but there was no parliamentary approval. Most of the funding was supposed to come from private investors. So it was largely seen as AKON's private initiative. It may have had government goodwill, but he did not have legislative backing. And that's one reason AKON City stalled, even with all of AKON's star power and international spotlight. It's just so sad.
It is. And, you know, I saw an interview with him on a popular radio show last month or 2 months ago, where he said that his biggest mistake was announcing it publicly before he had secured the funding. He had secured funding for AKON Lighting Africa. He was, I think, in 36 or so different countries around the continent of Africa with some version of this AKON Lighting Africa project. So I think he had presumed that he'd be able to take a lot of what he learned there, gathering that funding, and apply that in Senegal. But as you can see, Senegal repossessed the land. There's going to be maybe a resort. That's it. So it's 800 acres of land, I think is what they said. And what is now is just going to be one sole resort that is going to be there, the quote unquote more realistic option. So that's unfortunate. I will say there are other folks who have very similar ambitions. You know, Michael Blackson, the comedian who's Liberian and Ghanaian, was building a school, ran into some challenges there. That's a story for another time. But I do want to speak to Sierra Leonean and Ghanaian Idris Elba, who also has similar ambitions in Sierra Leone. So he has a dream of building an eco-friendly smart city on the coast of Sierra Leone, and it just moved a step closer to reality. The investment framework agreement for SHERBRO Island has officially been ratified by Sierra Leone's parliament, marking a major milestone for Idris's vision. Idris and his childhood friend, Shaka Stevens, who's the grandson of a former president in Sierra Leone, are set to lead the project through their company, SHERBRO Alliance Partners. Social media is buzzing, of course, with some comparing it to what AKON was doing. And that's why we wanted to share this story. You have one, unfortunately, negative story and what looks to be a positive story. We'll listen to some words from Idris, and then we'll give some commentary on the other side.
Oh, we're back in Freetown after a long period, almost 6 years of working with the government on the SHERBRO Alliance project. We finally got the document, the IFA, ratified in government. It's an investment framework agreement that is backed by law, so the SHERBRO Alliance Development Framework Agreement stays, which is a really, really significant development. It's something that we needed. The IFA is an actual amazing document that allows public-private partnership to create a model that allows investment to be secure. To have it for an entire island is like super unique. So we're here not only to celebrate, but we're here also to have dialogue with the press and the community about what this means. That's why I felt it really important to come here, tell them what it means, give them a sense of what happens next.
And for more context, he says it stays. That means that regardless of who is in office, the idea is that this continues to go. You know, Sierra Leone, we have this thing where we go back and forth between the two major political parties, 10 years under the previous political party, 10 years at the end of this next term of this particular political party. Some people presume that we'll go back to the other one. And so what he's saying is that this is now basically codified into law. This is going to move forward as a framework, regardless of who is at the helm of the country. Thoughts from you, Gloria? I have some additional thoughts, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and you can't help but draw comparisons, which people are doing. And I get why people are using AKON's project as a reference point, and even some are even warning Idris. But the difference is that unlike AKON's project, Idris Elba's SHERBRO Island has legislative backing. So it's being treated as a real public-private partnership. It's not being treated as just some kind of dream. It doesn't promise to be a tech utopia, but it does promise a livable green city for Sierra Leoneans. It's still very ambitious, but the approval that he got through Parliament might just make it happen. So perhaps a lesson we can draw from this is that there is a disconnect. We have to be conscious of the disconnect between ambition and governance.
Absolutely. And let me add to that. I think that there's a couple things that I think make this a little bit different as well. So with AKON, I think he was looking for investment first. And what I see with what Idris did is he found partnerships first that will make it easier to get investment. What do I mean by that? Number one, he got insurance, right? So I think people will feel more secure putting their money in it because they're expected to get it back if this goes wrong, right? He got a major insurance company. There's some questions about the insurance company because apparently they insured slave owners years ago. Lloyd's Insurance, you can look them up, but they're based in the UK, if I'm not mistaken. But they are one of the insurance companies that have backed this project. He also has a deal with Octopus Energy. They're a solar energy company, and I'm not sure where they're based out of, somewhere in Europe, but they offer solar energy. And so going beyond just the solar energy, wind energy, they offer wind energies. Octopus Alliance offers wind energy. So going beyond just solar, wind energy, and diversifying how he plans to bring energy to the island. And I will say that basically the goal of this is to make this like Dubai in West Africa. Many of our African leaders, those who have done well for themselves financially, they vacation and go to Dubai. And what we'd like to see is maybe some of those staying on the continent. And that's what he's trying to do with Shaka Stevens. I know Idris Elba is getting a lot of the praise for this, but Shaka actually is the one who came up with this idea. I interviewed Shaka Stevens, by the way, on this a little over a year and a half ago. As I mentioned, he's the grandson of a former president of Sierra Leone. And this has been for him a major, major project. And I think the reason why Idris came on board is because from Shaka's perspective, when Idris's father was still alive, he apparently spoke to Idris and he promised that he would do something in Sierra Leone. And so there's something more tied to this, which is why there's so many layers of work that has been done over the 6 years to make sure that this comes to fruition, because they did first start these conversations in 2019. So I do see this as different from what we saw with the AKON city. Doesn't necessarily guarantee its success, but I do think that this has at least the right framework to get it off on the right foot. So we'll continue to watch this and report on this. I've talked about this a lot on my platform as someone who goes to Sierra Leone often, who's spoken to the co-founder of this project. So we'll continue to follow this, and we hope that that this does come to fruition. I would be really excited to see it. I mean, obviously it means jobs, training, and a number of other things for Sierra Leone, tourism in particular, which I think Sierra Leone is severely lacking. All right, and with that, the last main headline of the day goes to Beninese music icon and Grammy winner Angelique Kidjo, who makes history as the first Black African honored on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So we'll play this video and have some commentary on the other side.
Musical icon Angelique Kidjo has become the first Black African performer to be selected for a star on the prestigious Hollywood Walk of Fame. Kidjo, who comes from the West African country of Benin and has won 5 Grammy Awards, was among the 35 names announced as part of the Walk of Fame's class of 2026 list. The 64-year-old was hailed as Africa's premier diva.
Angelique Kidjo was hailed as Africa's premier diva during a press conference announcing the list on Wednesday. Singer Miley Cyrus, actor Timothée Chalamet, actress Demi Moore, and former basketball player Shaquille O'Neal are also among those set to be honored with a star on Los Angeles' famous walk. Kidjo receives the honor after making music for more than 4 decades and releasing 16 albums.
16 albums. So, I'll leave it to you, because you have, obviously this is near and dear to your heart. So I want to just allow you to speak on this, please.
Let me have this moment, Joe. Thank you. Because Angelique Kidjo is not a baby in this game. Okay, this is one powerhouse of a talent. She's been in the game, as they said, for decades. And she is one of my personal icons as far as my singer-songwriter side is concerned. So I am in absolute awe of her. This is well-deserved. And to think that she was discriminated against by America, she was actually told at some point that her voice was too African for American radio. Yet she went ahead to win multiple Grammys. And beyond the music, Angelique has used her voice to champion women's rights. She's showcased African culture in one of the most beautiful ways I have ever seen. You need to watch her videos. Man, this woman. So yes, it is a time for Africa. It's a great time for Africa. It is time for Africa. And I think this took too long, but I guess better late than never. Angelique does deserve to smell some of her flowers while she's still here. That star that she got is for the entire continent. And it is a message to any African listening right now, or anybody who's, maybe from the diaspora or somebody in the diaspora who just thinks, hey, I can't be all that. The key is for you to be original. The key is for you to be authentic. This is what Angelique has done through the years, and now look at her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well put. I would just say the reason why there was the distinction of the first Black African, and that's why I emphasize that, is because there are white Africans who have been honored with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. In particular, Charlize Theron, who happens to be the first African, technically, because she is from South Africa, to win an Academy Award for the movie Monster in 2003. So she actually got her star on the Walk of Fame in 2005. So, the fact that this is the first Black African to win, to get a Hollywood star on the Walk of Fame is shocking, but maybe not surprising, considering, as you said, how she was treated. So yeah, we're proud of her. Obviously we don't need necessarily Western validation, but it does show that, you can continue to do you, be you, and not change for anyone. And, eventually those who have the ability to put you in the likes of other people that they hold in high regard, they will do so eventually. With that,
thank you for adding that, Joe, because I was actually going to add that. We never needed that validation for us to know that she is all that. But yeah, so perhaps as a continent, we just need to keep doing more to uphold our legends. Not saying we're not doing it, but Angelique deserves a whole lot more recognition than she even gets.
Absolutely. Agreed. And we all should know who she is. So I think what you all should do immediately following this is to go look up Angelique Kidjo on Spotify, on Apple Music, wherever you listen to your music today. Go listen and stream some of her music. Google her and get yourself up to speed. And I see that you highlighted this comment from Selfmade. We need a Black Star of Fame in Africa. We do. We need our own version for sure. Absolutely. And for Farkan Ali is applauding our sister's achievement. Nevertheless, we need our own star. Exactly. All right. So we are a bit over time, but people are very engaged and still on. So we do want to spend a little bit more time running through some more of the headlines. There were a few. So we went through in detail about 4 main stories or 5 main stories. So now we want to kind of go through some of the headlines as we do every week from around the continent of Africa. So where are we now? So we have a couple of stories that we wanted to review with you and just kind of give you the headlines and give you a chance to go back and do some research on your own. So now we go to Nigeria. Peter Obi affirms Labour Party loyalty amid Nigeria's opposition uniting with an ADC-led coalition for the 2027 election. As someone from the country of Nigeria, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and maybe some additional things that people should pay attention to when it comes to this particular headline.
Yeah, so this new coalition opposition alliance that's been spearheaded by the African Democratic Congress, ADC, is basically a bunch of parties and influential political figures coming together ahead of the 2027 elections. And what's interesting about it is that the current president is a part of the All Progressives Congress, APC, and now you even have some people from APC joining the ADC. But anyway, one very noteworthy part of it is Peter Obi, the former Labour Party presidential candidate, publicly reaffirming his commitment to the Labour Party, even though he's endorsing the ADC as the chosen platform for Nigeria's opposition ahead of 2027 elections. So people insist that Obi has to be the presidential candidate of ADC for them to be able to support it. It's just a very interesting thing going on.
Right, exactly. So I think for those who need maybe a little bit more context, imagine, because there are multiple political parties in Nigeria, but like imagine it's like the Republicans and Democrats, and then there's a third party, and the opposition party, the main opposition party, let's say, we can maybe call it that, like the Democrats, like if it was the Democrats right now, and the person who would be the leader of that is endorsing another third party. You know, that's, I think, where there's a little bit of confusion and people trying to figure out, is he going to stay with the Labour Party or is he going to move to this other party? It sounds like there are a lot of questions about that, but I think no matter where he is, there is a lot of support for Peter Obi, regardless of what party he is affiliated with. I talk to people in Nigeria all the time. As you guys know, a lot of the folks who run my social media pages and other people I know in Nigeria, Peter Obi is the guy that the people want. And so fingers crossed that there are free and fair elections in Nigeria in 2027, and he does become the leader of the country. So moving on to the next headline from around the continent. There was a video that Gloria shared with me earlier this week or last week of Bill Gates, who was facing criticism over his tone-deaf Gates Foundation campaign in Nigeria. It sparked outrage, really, and debate on philanthropy and perception. I encourage you guys to watch the video yourselves. But before you watch it, you might need some additional context. So, Gloria, can you please give us your thoughts on this? Because I also needed that context. I was not aware of the all of the details behind it.
Ciao. Somebody said this is white validation. Yeah, but speaking of white validation, Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation faced a lot of backlash for what some people may perceive as tone-deaf messaging in Nigeria, especially concerning local healthcare and agricultural priorities. M.I. Abaga is a very popular and prominent rapper from Nigeria. And I was shocked that it was actually in this video. I'll describe the details of the video in just a bit. I was shocked he was part of this because M.I. is extremely brilliant. And I was also shocked that nobody could suggest going in a different direction. Like nobody on the crew thought, wait a minute, this isn't how we should do this. Right. So basically, the video is about, you see people struggling to sing a very popular song from Nigeria from the 80s called Nigeria Go Survive. Nigeria Will Survive is what it means. That's the essence of the message in the song. And then M.I.'s character in this video, the video that we're talking about now, M.I.'s character is saying that, because the people were singing off key, right? So M.I. was like, oh, no, it's missing something. And then next thing they come in, somebody comes on a bike and you can see the Caucasian man's hands, and I'm like, there's a mask on his face. Well, like, who are they bringing to come help us with this song? And it turns out to be Bill Gates. In other words, my interpretation, Nigeria needs Bill for it to survive. Of all songs to pick. Anyway, I suspect that this was done for PR, especially because of the bad rap that Bill Gates has gotten on the African continent. But this one did not land. Absolutely.
I mean, and without that context, you could see that it was just off-putting, right? With that additional context, it is a little disappointing for those all involved because, you get the treatment for this thing before you go and shoot it. You don't just show up on the day of and they give you a script and you do it. You're told beforehand what is going to be shot that day, right? And so you have the ability to make adjustments or changes. I believe that the amount of money offered was just too high for anyone to pay too much attention to the off-puttingness of the video. Because the Bill and Melinda, the Gates Foundation, I should say, they're changing it. I think Melinda Gates is no longer part of it. It focuses, it spends a lot of money on the continent. And I think a lot of people will look at this and say, well, it's for a good cause, so they don't feel bad taking a large sum of money and doing something that has, you know, just this leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. And so I don't think that this was nefarious on anyone's part. I just think it was miscalculated and missed the mark and tone deaf for sure. All the things. But yeah, so yeah, we can move on from that story. Just wanted to give my additional thoughts on that. Because I watched the video and I was like, what is this? Okay, so moving on. Assimi Goïta is set to remain in power at least to 2030. I think we've spoken about this before. I think the new piece is that his term can be renewed indefinitely. So some of the concerns around something like this is the fact that someone like Paul Kagame, for example, continues to renew his terms over and over again. Many African leaders have done so. Now, I think the difference between maybe him and some other African leaders is the fact that many of the people of Mali really want Assimi Goïta in power for as long as possible, and they've been saying it outwardly. I think that is the beginning for a lot of countries, though, and so the question is whether or not there will ever be a democratic election again, and some people say there shouldn't be, right? If you ask people on the ground, they don't necessarily want that. A lot of people want to continue to see Goïta in power because, unfortunately, every time they've had elections in the past, they have seen leaders that don't take the country into consideration. But I'd love to get your thoughts on the unlimited renewals and the potential to be in power until he decides he's done or he's no longer with us.
I guess that, as you pointed out, this has become quite the pattern. Museveni, I mean, I guess we'll just have to keep, we'll just have to wait and see. But perhaps now the White House can invite him as well to the table, just as they did Gabon. Make noise.
Make noise. Yeah, and you mentioned Museveni. That's Uganda, for those who are not aware. And there are many African presidents that have been in power either through democratic elections or coups for over 20 years. Some 30 years, some 40 years. And so there's a video we referenced previously. You guys can check it out on African Stream's X page, because it still exists, where they went through some of the lengthy terms that some of the African presidents have been in power. Some of them are in the 80s and 90s, and they've been in power since sometimes the 70s, sometimes the 80s. It's been quite some time, longer than the two of us on this live stream have been alive, which is wild to think, especially in my case.
And I'm only like half his age, so.
Right, exactly. There you go. And so South Sudan, was it 8 migrants deported to South Sudan, raising concerns about the stability of the destination country. Thoughts on this particular headline?
Yeah, you know, Trump's government is big on despicable migrants, so they consider them despicable because of violent crimes that they reportedly committed in the US. But then you pick South Sudan of all places. This is one of the world's most volatile countries. They've had conflicts since independence in 2011. So unlike conventional deportations to countries that are more stable, this obviously is raising a lot of ethical and legal concerns. US courts did accept assurances under the Convention Against Torture, but there is no concrete protection guaranteed for these migrants, unlike past cases where countries have had a stronger rule of law infrastructure. So basically, they're on their own at this point.
Yeah, and look, I think the reason why this isn't getting much news and coverage is because they've been accused of violent crimes, right? And so I think a lot of people are just kind of saying, well, good riddance, right? I mean, these are immigrants to the United States or migrants to the United States who have committed or who have been convicted of committing violent crime. And so I think that's why people have not been debating this. Okay, so on to a country where they've been considering taking migrants that haven't committed violent crimes. We're off to Rwanda and Kagame expresses concerns about trusting other parties in the recent peace deal. If you guys remember, we reported last week the meeting between leadership in the DRC and Rwanda in DC last week. They had a peace deal. They struck a peace deal. Marco Rubio, Donald Trump spoke, and that was, we referenced it earlier with the reporter where Trump remarked on her beauty. Thoughts on what Paul Kagame is saying about trusting third parties with this particular peace deal?
Yeah, you remember last week when we talked about the importance, I talked about the importance of M23 being at the negotiating table, even though, yeah, America may not recognize them as worthy of being at the table, being that they're rebels and or whatnot. And of course, bringing them to the table may confirm the allegations or suspicions or claims that Rwanda is funding these people. But anyway, Kagame has trust issues. He doesn't believe that that much will come out of this. He thinks the conflicts will continue. And it's one thing to have people at the table and say, oh yeah, there's peace, and Trump asking for a Nobel Peace Prize, which, by the way, Netanyahu has nominated him for. But he thinks, oh, now I'm the peacemaker. But it goes beyond just having a conversation and signing stuff. I hope there will be peace for Congo. I hope there will be peace for Rwandans that are affected in all of this. All we want is peace.
There it is. I don't have much to add there. I think, look, and many state that the governments are complicit in much of the violence that is happening in this particular country, in the DRC. There's lots of evidence to show that Rwanda is funding the M23 rebels, and that the government of DRC has been complicit in some of the other violent attacks and violence that are happening around these mineral-rich areas around the country. I'll also mention that Kagame himself said that all of the minerals being extracted, legally or illegally, is coming through Rwanda. Most of it is coming through Rwanda. And instead of saying we need to figure out how do we ensure that this goes back to Rwandans, he just blamed the countries where it was going. He said in a video last year, we talked about it on This Week in Africa, the previous iteration of this, where he himself said publicly, why don't you blame Australia and Europe instead of Rwanda for being the transport hub to these places, which I thought was interesting. So yeah, his skepticism, I think, is, I guess, warranted, but also it seems like he's complicit anyway in the challenges that are happening there. All right, those were the stories from around the continent, and the main headlines of the day. We went a little bit over time, about 30 minutes over time. I want to thank you guys all for staying on as long as you did and staying engaged as much as you have been. I think it's a testament to the audience and how informed you guys want to be and are. And so we appreciate all the commentary as much as possible. I'm trying to bring on some comments from Instagram. You guys might have noticed that I copied and pasted some of those into the chat here. And then, we also went through as many as we could of the comments. So thanks for your patience, guys, and also joining us for this long. So those of you guys who watched this long, any final words for everyone watching?
No, just again, thank you all for joining us. And, we're on socials. I'm at the Gloria Ayo. He's on authentic_African. Keep sharing the word, repost, share this video, just like it, drop a comment. These are the things that really help. We're trying to ensure that African story has its place. And by you doing this, you help us achieve that. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And stay tuned next Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, when we're back live again. I will also be live this Sunday and next Monday. So just follow the platform to know when that is happening. So with that, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you all on the next live stream. Bye, guys.